Tonight we have 5 stories, from strange happenings in a hospital to a potential alien encounter, and closing the video off with 3 camping stories. A huge thank you to the generous authors who have allowed me to share these stories with all of you. Please be sure to drop a like and comment if you enjoy. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm a medical student doing a rotation in a hospital in Vermont, and something terrifying happened to me a few days ago. The hospital I'm rotating with is a pretty large, busy hospital. However, overnight and into the very early morning, the wards are practically dead. I had been working on a general medicine floor for the past week, and normally got in closer to 5 a.m. I had decided to come in even earlier Monday morning to do some chart reviews on new weekend admissions prior to rounding. Inexplicably, I started off the morning feeling jumpy and on edge. I pulled into the hospital parking lot garage, which was pretty empty this early in the morning. It was midwinter and pitch black outside, and as a petite female, the dark, empty parking garage made me uncomfortable. I pulled into the most well-lit parking space, and as I exited my car, I looked around in all directions to make sure I was alone. I hurried inside, the clicking of my shoes echoing loudly throughout the empty garage. The automatic sliding doors chimed as they opened, and I began climbing the stairs, hearing the doors slide shut behind me. When I got to the top of the first flight, I heard the automatic doors chime open again behind me. I found it odd that someone had entered just behind me without me seeing them in the parking garage first, so I paused to listen for footsteps. Silence. I leaned over the side rail to look at the first floor landing, which was mostly hidden from my view. An elongated shadow fell across the floor, unmoving. After a moment, I heard the sliding doors close again. Seeing no further movement, I continued up the last flight of steps quickly, trying not to let my imagination get the best of me. I felt relieved when I finally entered the bridge to the hospital, which was well lit with bright fluorescent lights. The building is a long hallway leading to a main foyer, and mounted above the doorway at the end is one of those security camera monitors that shows the recording of the entire corridor. I watched the grainy image of myself walking down the hallway, my image getting larger as I got closer to the camera. As I got closer to the screen, it appeared that there was a man-sized shadow at the far end of the hallway behind me. I slowed down, squinting at the screen, and turning to look behind me. No one was there. I turned back, and still, in the screen, a tall, elongated shadow stood at the end of the hall, unmoving. I hurried forward, and as I turned the corner into the foyer, I glanced again behind me, still seeing nothing out of the ordinary. Perhaps it was just the poor screen quality. A security guard sat idly at the reception counter. He nodded at me as I passed. I continued down a side hallway, cut through a lounge, and got into the back patient transport elevator. I stepped in, hit floor number 6, and leaned against the wall, pulling out my phone. The elevators in the hospital were notoriously slow, and I began scrolling through random Facebook posts as the elevator doors began to close. I heard a chime as the doors shuddered to a stop and began to open again, the way they do when someone else outside hits the up arrow to get on. I waited, figuring it was another early bird worker or patient getting on, but no one entered. The doors began to close again on their own, and then, as if someone had pressed the up button again, the doors shuddered open a second time. Annoyed, I said, "Is someone going up?" And I leaned my head out of the elevator, only to find an empty hallway. I glanced around for a few moments, and then sighing, I stepped back in and mashed on the closed door button. After a few seconds, the doors shut completely. I returned my attention to my phone but looked up again when the elevator did not begin to move. To my extreme annoyance, the elevator chimed as the doors opened yet again. This time, as the metal doors parted, I saw that the hallway outside was pitch black, the light from the elevator illuminating only a few feet in front of the doors. I blinked in confusion, trying to make sense of it. As I looked out into the darkness, I got the creepy feeling that something I couldn't see was looking back at me. The rational part of me thought that maybe it was some sort of electric malfunction, but I was so freaked out that I pressed myself against the elevator wall and jabbed frantically on the closed door button, feeling immense relief when the doors closed again and the elevator began to rise. It traveled smoothly up to the 6th floor, and when the doors opened, I hurried out. I entered the medicine ward, feeling a sense of normalcy return when I passed the unit secretary chatting on the phone. I walked by the resident call room. The latch on the door read, "Occupied," meaning the overnight resident was probably sound asleep still. I took a seat in the provided work room, a night nurse napping with her head down on the desk behind me. I logged onto a computer and printed out the patient list for the day. Most of the patients that had been admitted the week before were still here, and I set to work, quickly forgetting the creepy events of this morning as I printed patient notes and filled out vitals. It was about 4:30 a.m. when I began seeing patients. I was in my 4th year of medical school, so waking patients up in the early morning to check in on them no longer made me feel bad. I knocked on the first patient's door, an elderly man with pneumonia, and stepped into the dark room, calling out, "Mr. Roberts?" The most annoying part about rounding this early in the morning was trying to navigate patients' rooms in complete darkness. I heard a grunt from the bed, and I fumbled around in the room until I found the handle to the bathroom door. I turned the knob and cracked the door open. The light from the bathroom illuminated the room enough for me to see the patient. I asked my standard set of questions, listened to heart and lungs, palpated his abdomen and legs, and then closed the bathroom door, casting the room in darkness again before I slipped out of the door and onto the next patient. And so, I zipped from room to room, the same routine as any other morning. I was nearly at the end of the patient list when I came across room 633 on my list. Reagan Rose, a 94-year-old female admitted for fever of unknown origin, found to have lymphadenopathy and a diffuse rash. Beneath it, there was a checklist of labs to follow up. The patient had been admitted Friday afternoon. My resident had requested that I work on her admission history and physical. I remember entering the room last week to see a tiny old woman sitting on her bed, looking out the window, long, stringy white hair obscuring her face. Her bare arm was covered in purple-black boils, and her fingers ended in long, overgrown nails. She had turned to look at me when I entered, both eyes covered in white film, her lips cracked with a toothless smile. She answered all my questions in a quiet, thin voice. I remember being able to feel her rib cage beneath her gown as I listened to her lungs, which rattled as she breathed. My resident ordered a multitude of labs on her to get to the bottom of her mysterious illness, but could not find anything conclusive. She was pleasant enough, but she looked like she had climbed out of the morgue, and I'd hoped she would have been discharged by now. It was just past 5 a.m., and it was still pitch black outside. The day staff wouldn't be arriving until around 6 a.m. I knocked quietly on room 633's door, then slipped inside, closing the door behind me. The smell hit me as I took a step forward. A putrid, decaying sulfur smell assaulted my nose. "Mrs. Rose?" I called out to the oppressive darkness in the room. "Yeah?" a thin voice replied, sounding like the creaking of a rusted hinge. "It's Sophie. I'm the medical student that you met Friday afternoon." I felt my way along the wall until I reached the bathroom door. I turned the knob and reached in for the light switch. I flicked the light switch on, and a light on the ceiling flickered briefly before going out again. I cursed inwardly and turned to face the room again. "It appears the bathroom light isn't working," I said, hearing the nervousness in my own voice. She did not respond. The hallway light slipped in from under the door, illuminating a small amount of the floor, but the bed remained in shadow as my eyes tried to adjust to the dark. "How are you feeling this morning?" "I'm doing quite well, thank you." Her voice had a strange, unnatural falsetto pitch to it. I went through my list of review. Any chest pain, shortness of breath, abdominal pain, diarrhea? And each question she answered no, her voice getting quieter and quieter, until I had to step closer to the bed to hear her. "Do you mind if I take a listen to you?" I asked, one hand on my stethoscope. "Not at all, my dear," she said, sounding oddly amused. I approached the bed carefully, just able to make out the outline of her thin form under the blanket. As I got closer, the smell became more potent, and I tried breathing through my mouth only. I pressed my stethoscope to her chest. Her lungs sounded rough and raspy, like forced air through an old paper bag. I could not hear a heartbeat over the sound, though I repositioned my stethoscope many times. I figured the combination of my inexperience and the thickness of the blankets hindered my attempts. As I listened, her hand lifted from her side and her ice-cold leathery fingers brushed over my arm, her long nails scraping lightly over my skin. I pulled back, shuddering. "You have such lovely skin, Sophie." Her voice suddenly sounded deeper and husky. "Thank you?" I stammered, feeling thoroughly creeped out. She was chuckling now, low in her chest, the sound deep and animal-like. By now, my eyes had adjusted to the dark and I could make out some of her facial features through the shadows. The light from under the door was reflected in her glossy eyes, which were fixed upon me, wide and unblinking. Her mouth was twisted into a gaping, toothless grin. I wanted to get out of there, but it occurred to me that I needed to turn on the light and examine her rash before I left. "Mrs. Rose, I just need to turn on the light for a moment," I said, stepping back. Her smile vanished. "No, don't. Not the light," she rasped, sounding alarmed. "Only for a moment," I said. As I leaned over her nightstand table, I felt around for the light cord that hung at the end of every bed. "No, no, no," she yelled, thrashing her head back and forth. "I'll turn it off when I'm done," I insisted, my fingers finding the light cord. She thrust the blankets off and sat up abruptly, much more agile than I would have thought possible in her condition. "I said no, you fucking bitch," she boomed, her voice deep and inhuman. She leapt out of bed and I heard the sound of bare feet slapping against the floor as she sprinted towards me. I did not have time to react. The full force of her bony body slammed into me. I tried to back away, but she grabbed at my arm, her fingernails biting painfully into my skin. Her other hand grabbed a fistful of my hair and she yanked me backward with more strength than her frail arms should have had. She began shaking me, tearing at my hair. I tried to wrench myself free, but she was too strong. I pulled at her fingers and felt them crack as they bent backwards, but still she held on. Her face was near mine, and that inhuman voice hissed into my ear. "I'm going to wear your skin, you fucking bitch," over and over again as she shook me. The sounds of my own screams filled the room as I struggled to get away. Suddenly, I was thrown backwards against the wall. At that moment, the hallway door burst open as a few nurses barged in. "What's going on here?" one of them said, flicking on the light to the room. "Mrs. Rose attacked me," I gasped, gesticulating towards the bed as I slowly sat up. The nurses looked bewildered as they glanced at me, then to the bed and back. The room was silent. One of them knelt down, brushing my hair away from my face. "What are you talking about? That patient is dead." "No, that's impossible. I came in here, we talked, and she grabbed at me and... I stammered, getting to my feet and looking toward the bed. The woman's body lay in the bed completely still, her arms rigid at her side, her skin gray and her features lifeless. The bed sheets were slightly disheveled, the only sign of any disturbance. The room was silent, absent of the harsh breath sounds that I had heard earlier. I had seen dead bodies before, and there was no question that she was dead. "She's dead?" I squeaked. "Since when?" The nurses shifted uneasily behind me. By now, a few other workers from the floor had gathered in the doorway. "Several hours ago. Transport is here now to take her body to the morgue," one of them said. I stood there dumbly as a man entered the room, covered her face with the bed sheet, and then began wheeling the bed out of the room and down the hall. I stared after it in disbelief. "What did you do to your arm?" one of the nurses asked. The arm that had reached for the light switch was covered in deep, bloody scratches. As I washed my arm in the sink, I heard the nurses whispering to the overnight resident outside the room, who had finally woken up. He entered the room, and clearing his throat, he said, "It's, difficult for everyone involved when a patient passes away. Why don't you take the next few days off?" He patted my shoulder awkwardly. I knew at this point that no one believed me, so I nodded in agreement and left. On the drive home, I tried to pretend I had imagined the whole thing in my exhausted state of mind. However, later, at home when I was showering, I found a long, cracked fingernail tangled in my hair. I vomited after that and drove home to spend some time at my parents' house. Still haven't been able to make sense of what happened. Darling, you just fell asleep at the wheel, my wife told me. Thankfully, I was able to wake you up before our car skidded off the road. She spoke with a concerned tone. Yeah, you're probably right, I replied, and I was convinced that that was what happened. I must have fallen asleep and dreamed about seeing a bright light in the sky emitting from a huge disc-like object. I mean, how outlandish is that? To think that we had seen some sort of alien spacecraft. Vishaka and I laughed about it for a while, before we went back to unpacking. You see, we were returning home from a road trip. It was late at night and the street was empty. Then suddenly, I saw what seemed like a scene from a horror movie. A light, the brightness of which was unlike anything I had ever seen before, descended from what looked like a disc-shaped void. That's the best way I can describe it. The disc wasn't even black, but somehow darker and could be easily distinguished from the night sky. It blinded me momentarily, and when I came to, the light was gone and my wife, Vishaka, or V, as I like to call her, was frantically asking if I was okay. I asked what happened to that bright light. She gave me a confused look and asked what I was talking about. She said that I had fallen asleep while driving and I must have had a dream. She took the wheel after that and drove us home as I was clearly in no condition to do so. About a week after that incident, I began to notice that something was different about V. For one thing, she had become sexually insatiable. My wife has always had a great sex drive, but now she seemed to want it all the time. As soon as she came home from work, she would take me to the shower, then the couch, then the bed, then the shower again. I couldn't complain, but this sudden spike did seem a bit strange. We never used condoms as she had a bilateral salpingectomy years ago. Neither of us ever wanted children. One night, when we had finished several rounds of great sex, we were laying in bed. I had my arm around her and she rested her head on my chest, and her back was towards the window. I was running my fingers through her silky hair and reveling in post-coital bliss, when suddenly my tranquility was shattered. The same light I had seen, or thought I had seen on that empty stretch of road, was now shining above my neighbor's house. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window. That blinding light lasted for not more than a few seconds before it vanished. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. I turned around to find V standing there looking bewildered. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" she asked back. "The same damn light I saw that night on the road. Come on, don't tell me you didn't see it," I said, exasperated. My wife came close to me and placed a hand on my cheek and told me I was probably tired and seeing things. I told her again that it was there. She smiled and told me again that there was no light there, that I was just tired and needed to be relaxed. I would have protested further, had she not gotten down on her knees and wrapped her lips around my you-know-what. The pleasure I felt blotted out any reflection. By the time I got dressed for work the next morning, I had convinced myself that she was probably right and I had just hallucinated. Apart from her new sexual appetite, V's behavior changed in other ways as well. She seemed to be growing very distant from her friends and family. I ran into her best friend one day and she asked if V was okay. She said V hadn't been returning her calls or texts. I told her she was probably busy and that I would talk to her. V had been paying for her grandmother's assisted living and made it a point to visit her at least once a week. One evening, V's grandma called me. She was clearly distressed and told me that V hadn't called her or come to visit in weeks. In fact, the last time she had seen V was the day before we left for our road trip, which was over a month ago now. The poor woman sounded heartbroken. I told her I was sorry and promised that I would speak to V about it. That night, after recovering from the torrid sex, I mustered the energy to ask V why she hadn't spoken to her grandma for so long. At first she looked confused, then a look of recollection dawned on her face and she replied, "Oh, right, yeah, I'll see her soon." I suggested that we invite Grandma over for lunch to make it up to her. I knew for a fact that she loved her granddaughter's cooking. Vishaka agreed. That Saturday, as she made lunch for the three of us, I picked up her grandmother and brought her over. V hugged her as she always did, but there was something off about that hug. I can't put my finger on what it was. It just seemed wrong. As V and I were setting the table for lunch, she knocked over the bottle of wine, and I mean she deliberately knocked it down. It fell from the counter and shattered. I just stared at V for a few seconds, perplexed. She said it was an accident, but it sure didn't look like one to me. I decided not to make a big deal about it. She implored me to go to the liquor store nearby and get another bottle. I reluctantly agreed. On my way to and from the store, I couldn't help but ponder over V's strange behavior. Why had she become so distant from her loved ones? Why did she knock over the wine bottle? And did she actually do that, or did I dream that up as well? Should I talk to her about it, or just let this all slide? Was I overthinking this? As it turned out, I wasn't going to get much peace of mind, regardless of whether I confronted Vishaka or not. When I came back from the store, V's grandmother was lying on the floor. V stood over. The look on her face can only be described as a combo of mild annoyance and amusement. I rushed to her grandma to check on her. She was unconscious. I was about to check her pulse when V told me she had already done that, and that grandma was dead. I was shocked by the coldness in her voice. But this wasn't the time to dwell on that. I called the emergency hotline. The paramedics confirmed that she was dead. We later learned that it was a massive heart attack. I finally asked V what exactly had happened. She nonchalantly told me that Grandma had been walking to the kitchen when suddenly she clutched her chest and fell down. I couldn't get over V's tone. What was wrong with her? She'd always been such a loving granddaughter. The V I knew would have been crushed by her grandmother's demise. The woman who stood in front of me seemed like a completely different person, and I was scared of her. I decided to sleep in the guest bedroom that night, in spite of V's attempts to seduce, and later to guilt trip me into sleeping with her. I lay in bed awake, wondering what the hell was going on. All evidence pointed to a completely natural cause for my wife's grandmother's death. Logically, I had no reason to suspect otherwise. And yet, that look on V's face, her tone when she talked about seeing her grandmother drop dead, I was mentally exhausted but couldn't fall asleep. The strangeness that came upon my wife haunted me. The next day, I left for work early. When I came home, V was already home. She was sitting on the couch holding something in her hand. When she saw me, she smiled and held it up. It was a pregnancy test. It was positive. I stepped back. How was this possible? She had had a bicep. How the hell did she get pregnant? She smiled, a knowing, yet cryptic smile that sent a chill down my spine. She approached me, and before I could say anything, she spoke. Darling, I know that we agreed to not have children, but I'm going to keep this baby. It's okay if you don't want to be involved. We'll get a divorce and I'll get full custody. You don't have to pay child support. You'll be free from all the responsibilities. She continued to smile at me, as if she was daring me to ask questions, to verbalize the math I was doing in my head, to give her a reason to get rid of me. I said nothing. I simply nodded and stumbled to my car. I spent that night in a hotel room. All of this somehow did and didn't make sense at the same time. That light I saw was from a spacecraft. Somehow, when I had been blinded, my wife was replaced. The woman, the thing I saw next to me, after it disappeared, was not my wife. It was one of them. So was the thing growing inside her. It may share my DNA, but I felt no attachment to it. Only fear. And what had they done to my wife? What had they done to my V? Was she even alive? And was this the beginning of an invasion? The divorce was hassle-free. The house was mine, and I kept it. As V and I had signed a prenup that ensured that she would keep what's hers and I would keep what's mine. And I don't think the thing that looked like my wife was interested in material possessions. I've been spending time trying to get in touch with people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. I'm just grasping at straws here, hoping against hope to be able to see my wife again. I can't go to the police as they would surely think that I'm insane. Soon after the divorce, I heard that the thing pretending to be Vishaka had quit her job and was moving to another city. I should feel some relief now that she's away from me, but I don't. For my own safety, I've decided to move away as well. You see, my neighbor, the same neighbor over whose house I saw that bright light, is pregnant. This would not be extraordinary, except she's in her late 40s. Interestingly, her husband died of a heart attack just a few days ago. Never bring kids to White Rock Creek. Look, I know that White Rock Creek has been a popular location for hiking and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean it's safe. I don't know if adults are safe at White Rock Creek, but I do know for a fact that kids are not. It's because of Hippity Hop, or what the media has labeled the Bunny Man. Let me just say that it wasn't a man in a costume that I met at White Rock Creek in 1989. He was a real bunny-like creature. I know that it sounds made up, but it's true. His white fur, his big smile, his even bigger eyes, they were all real. And he wasn't a friendly rabbit either. He might seem like it at first, but do not trust him, ever. He'll try to befriend children, and eventually try to keep them at White Rock Creek forever. I'm writing this as a warning, and maybe as a goodbye. This is what happened when I visited White Rock Creek. It all started on the bus. Me, other kids, and teachers from my school were traveling in. We were staying at White Rock Creek for a few days to study wildlife in the area. I was sitting with my best friend Zach, and we were just talking about stuff kids in the 80s would talk about, like arcades and horror movies. I looked out the window while Zach was talking about how Freddy Krueger would beat Jason Voorhees' butt. That's when I saw the sign for White Rock House. The place all of us would be staying for the next few days, but something in the bushes caught my eye. 2 big rabbit ears stuck out behind a bush. They looked to be at least a foot tall, which were big for regular rabbit ears. I guess you could say that I was curious to know what the ears were attached to, but they suddenly vanished into the bushes in a split second. I turned to Zach, who was still talking about the battle of Jason versus Freddy. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing out the window. Zach stopped talking and tried to look out the window. "See what?" he asked. "Those big rabbit ears," I said. "They were like a foot tall." Zach scoffed. "You think that a giant rabbit is in the woods? You need help." I looked back outside the window, but we had already passed where I saw the ears sticking out. "I know I saw something," I said. "Something was sticking out of the bushes. Maybe it wasn't rabbit ears, but there was definitely something there." I turned back to look at Zach, who only said, "Maybe." He started talking about his earlier topic, but I didn't really listen. I was still thinking about what I saw in the bushes. When we arrived to White Rock House, Miss Donald said for all the kids to exit the bus first. Once we did, she did a head count to make sure we were all there. I turned around to see the white building that stood behind us. It was a big wooden house, 4 stories high, and was painted white all over. The steps leading up to the porch looked like they could collapse any second, and the white paint was starting to peel off the walls. It looked pretty spooky to me, but no one seemed bothered by the house when we went inside. The first floor had 5 rooms, a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. Some of the kids and chaperones would be put into the 2 bedrooms on this floor, and everyone else would sleep in the rooms on the upper floors. Me and Zach, already partnered as bunkmates, were situated on the bunk bed closest to the window on the first floor. Another kid and a chaperone would be sharing the room with us. Miss Donald said that we could explore around the house while the teachers and chaperones unpacked for the night. Me and Zach went out behind the house, where a little tire swing sat under a tree. It was still functional, and me and Zach took turns swinging around. But after a while, Zach said that he needs to get a bottle of water from his bag inside. He left me on the tire swing while he ran inside. I started swinging myself up and down in the tire swing, a bit bored without Zach. But I wouldn't be bored for long, because the rabbit ears returned. I saw in the woods behind the house. The tall rabbit ears I saw before were sticking out from behind a tree. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over to see where the ears were. But when I got closer and closer, A figure started coming out from behind the tree. It was a rabbit, a tall one. Even from a few feet away, he seemed to tower over me. His body, head to toe, was covered in fluffy white fur. He had a wide smile on his face with 2 buck teeth sticking out. His big brown eyes seemed to stare right into my soul. He waved his paw at me when he came out of his hiding spot. "Hi, Joseph." How could he talk? How did he know my name? He took a step towards me, waiting for me to respond. In disbelief, I gave him a small wave. The rabbit stepped closer to me, but I didn't run away. I stood still as the rabbit continued speaking. "My name is Hippity Hop. It's not too often that people come around here. It's pretty lonely, really." He frowned as I just continued watching him slowly walk closer to me. "I'd like to have a friend to play with." He started to smile again. He stopped a few inches in front of me, and I had to tilt my neck to meet Hippity Hop's eyes. "Will you be my friend?" Now, I was 10 years old at the time. I knew that I wasn't allowed to talk to strangers, but Hippity Hop seemed to be sad that he couldn't have any friends in White Rock Creek. I nodded, and the rabbit immediately hugged me in response. His soft fur felt nice against my face, and I hugged him back. When he let go, he was literally jumping for joy. "Thank you, Joseph," he said. But he suddenly stopped jumping. "But you can't talk about me to anyone. I must be a secret, okay?" I nodded, and Hippity Hop smiled. "Well, I'll see you later, Joseph." He walked off into the woods, as I felt Zach touch my shoulder. "Hey, what are you doing back here?" I looked back behind me, but Hippity Hop was already gone. "Nothing," I said, looking back at Zach. "Let's go back on the tire swing." "I'm next," Zach shouted, running towards it. I looked behind me again, and this time I saw Hippity Hop peeking at me behind a tree. I waved at him as I made my way to where Zach was. The next day, I was lying on the grass, looking up at the sky while I waited for the teachers to finish making lunch. I closed my eyes, taking in the fresh air and thinking that so far, this was a great trip. My day was about to get better when a furry paw tapped my shoulder. I sat up and looked behind me, seeing Hippity Hop also lying on the grass, smiling up at me. "Aren't you worried that someone will see you?" I asked. He shook his head. I chuckled. "You want to play something?" Hippity Hop immediately sat up and turned to me. "Of course. Friends always play games together." "How about hide and seek?" I suggested. "Only if I can seek first," Hippity Hop said. "How about you hide in the woods?" He pointed to the woods behind me, and I nodded. "Okay." I got up and started running into the woods, hearing Hippity Hop counting down. Hiding behind a tree, I heard Hippity Hop walking through the woods. I was thinking about how surreal this was, playing with a giant talking rabbit I just met yesterday. It didn't seem possible, but it was. When I heard Hippity Hop getting closer, I quietly walked away from my hiding spot. I heard the creek a few feet away, and I made my way through the trees to the White Rock Creek. It was true to its name. The rocks under the water were pale and made the water look like a light gray color. I started walking the direction the creek was heading. The water moved pretty fast, which made me start running with it. It was fun for a while until I came across something in the bushes. It was a person, I thought. Their legs stuck out of the bushes, with some sort of red substance on it. I slowed down. A strong metallic smell seemed to punch me in the face. Was that what I thought it was? Was it? "Got ya!" Hippity Hop grabbed my shoulders, making me jump a bit. He laughed, but seeing my worried expression, he frowned. "What's wrong?" I pointed to the leg. "Who's that in the bushes?" Hippity Hop seemed to frown more. "You might need to go," he said. "I'll take you back." Hippity Hop led me away from the bushes and to White Rock House. I tried to look back, but Hippity Hop turned my head back to looking forward. Was he trying to hide something? Who could that be in the bushes? The next 2 days, I kind of forgot about what I saw. Me and Hippity Hop usually played or talked in the woods, where no one else would be able to see us. Zach had been noticing that I'd been disappearing lately, and I would just tell him that I like exploring places. Now it was the 5th day at White Rock Creek, which was the last day we would be here. I was sad because I wouldn't be able to play with Hippity Hop anymore after we left tomorrow morning. So me and him played all day, from after breakfast till right before dinner. But after dinner, I wanted to say goodbye to Hippity Hop before it was too late. So I walked to the spot where we usually met, and I saw him emerge from behind a tree. "You're back. Want to play tag some more?" he asked. I tried to think of what to say, but finally said, "I can't." "Then why are you here?" Hippity Hop asked, confused. "I'm here to say goodbye," I said. "I'm going back tomorrow." Hippity Hop's eyes grew wide. "Leaving? But I thought we would stay friends forever." "I know, but I can't stay in White Rock Creek forever." I saw Hippity Hop give a big frown, seeming angry at me. "You're supposed to be my friend, Joseph," he shouted. "Friends don't leave each other." I didn't know what to say. I knew he'd be upset, but not this much. "Look, I need to go," I said. "I'm sorry I can't stay." "Wait," Hippity Hop said. "Can I just have one more hug?" I smiled, glad to know he was over it. "Sure." I ran over and hugged him, and he did the same. But after a few seconds, I felt his grip tighten. "Hey," I said, "that hurts." I tried to wiggle out of his grip, but that made him hug me tighter. It was starting to hurt, and I tried to tell him, but he just said, "We're friends forever, Joseph. You won't be leaving." I felt my legs lift off the ground as Hippity Hop turned and started walking deeper into the woods. I tried to scream for help, but his fur kept getting in my mouth. "You're mine." Hippity Hop started running deeper and deeper into the dark woods. I desperately tried hitting him, but he seemed unfazed. The trees were blocking the setting sun, and suddenly the light disappeared. It took me a second to realize that Hippity Hop had run into a cave. He stopped moving and dropped me on the floor. Whatever he dropped me in, it felt squishy and sticky. I tried getting up, but Hippity Hop grabbed my leg and kept me there. He grabbed a burnt candle and held it in front of me. "Say hi to my previous friends." Flame suddenly appeared on the candle, and the flame lit up what I had fell on. I screamed, seeing at least 20 kids. They had been brutally killed. Their eyes had been gouged out of their sockets, skin was ripped to shreds, and some kids had a few legs and arms missing. Their faces were frozen in screams, and I imagined that it must have been painful for them when they met their ends. It didn't take a genius to realize who the culprit was. Still holding my leg down, Hippity Hop explained, "I've met great kids over the years. They were always so kind, so innocent, so weak. They loved playing with me, Joseph, but they always had to leave someday, and you know that I don't like that. So I brought them here, where we could be friends forever." I started tearing up. "Please don't kill me," I cried. Hippity Hop laughed. "I don't just kill them instantly, Joseph," he said. "First, we play a game of tag. Isn't that funny? We were just playing that earlier, right?" I slowly nodded. Hippity Hop smiled, but it was more terrifying than sweet. "Joseph, if you can get back to White Rock House without me tagging you, I'll let you go. But," his smile widened, "if I tag you, you'll join them." He gestured to the dead kids in the cave. "Got it?" I nodded once more. "Good," Hippity Hop said. "You have 30 seconds. He started counting, and I quickly tried to get up and out of the cave, but I slipped on some blood from a kid's chest and managed to lose 6 seconds of running trying to get back up. The woods had gotten even darker than before. I felt like I was going nowhere as I kept running towards the direction I thought White Rock House was. I didn't stop to take a breather. I didn't look back. I just kept running and running, knowing that Hippity Hop would be right behind me very soon. I heard him. I don't know if he was behind me, but I knew he was running, and he was running a lot faster than I was. This somehow helped me run faster as I kept thinking that I would see White Rock House and I would be safe. But it wasn't the house that I saw first. It was Zach. He was calling for me. I yelled for him and started waving my hands, but I closed my mouth as soon as I could. Zach heard me, but so did Hippity Hop. I knew because I heard him stop in his tracks, then start running directly at me. "Zach," I screamed. I saw Zach turn around and look at me. "Joe, what are you?" I bumped right into him, knocking us both to the ground. "Hey, get off," Zach said. But when he saw my tearful eyes, he asked, "What happened to you?" "Hippity hop," I yelled. "He's going to get me if I don't get to the house." White Rock House was a few yards away, and I pulled Zach up. "Who the heck is Hippity Hop?" he asked. "Me." A figure appeared behind Zach. It was Hippity Hop, but now more disturbing than I had ever seen. His eyes were gone. Empty sockets sat where his big eyes used to be. His mouth was open in a devilish smile, full of sharp teeth that were stained with blood. His white fur was ripped, and blood drained out of scars on his body. He seemed to be a foot taller and skinnier. I could see the bones pressed against his skin. Zach turned around. Seeing what used to be the Hippity Hop, I remembered. Almost immediately, the creature grabbed trapped Zach in a hug. I heard Zach try to scream, but it was muffled by the fur and blood from the creature. It looked at me with a wide smile and said, "Thank you for the new friend. I'll be sure to pay you a visit when you return, Joseph." The creature and Zach disappeared into the woods, with me screaming for Zach to be let go. But he didn't return. All I could do was return to the White Rock House and tell them what happened, no matter how crazy it sounded. There were a few teachers already calling our names as I emerged out of the woods, my clothes covered in the blood from the corpses of the kids from the cave. Mrs. David, one of the chaperones who was outside at the time, screamed when they saw me covered in blood. The teachers and a few kids came over. "What happened?" Miss Quinn asked, and I told them. At first, they seemed to tune me out during the middle of the story, but started listening again when I said that Hippity Hop took Zach. Everything after that is a blur. I remember the police were called, and 2 groups of adults went into the woods to search for Zach. They found him, along with the other victims in Hippity Hop's cave, and after all these years, I still wish I could have saved him. My parents arrived at White Rock Creek to take me home after that, and when we passed the sign for White Rock House, I saw Hippity Hop hiding behind a tree for the last time. He was back to his regular rabbit form, except his mouth was covered with blood and his smile was full of sharp teeth. He waved to me and I immediately looked away. I now live with my 10-year-old daughter, Amy. It's been a good life, up until Amy gave the permission slip a few days ago. It was a 5-day trip at White Rock Creek. I knew Amy, and she would always want me to chaperone on her field trips. I couldn't tell her about Hippity Hop. It would for sure give her nightmares for months. I know it's stupid to go back, but Amy really wants to go on this trip, and I would do anything to make her happy after the divorce. So, like I said before, this is like a goodbye from me. Hippity Hop's words are repeating in my head now. I'll be sure to pay you a visit when you return. Never bring your kids to White Rock Creek, because he's not gone. He'll visit me when I get there, but I've come to accept it. At least I'll see Zach again, even if it's in hell. Me and Hippity Hop, we're best friends. We'll hug when he visits me, and this time, he won't let me go. I used to like swimming. I really, truly did. There was something about being in the water. It felt natural. You see, down in the most rural parts of the Delta, by the Mississippi River, the water was a part of us, of our culture. Half of our lives were spent in the water one way or the other. Ponds, lakes, rivers, didn't matter. We swam in them without an ounce of fear, for we knew them all. Perhaps that's our fault for being cocky. We didn't know better back then. It all began with a campfire and a dare. It wasn't strange for my friends and I to go camping. It was something we had grown up doing, a bonding activity for all of us. It wasn't even our first time camping by the Mississippi River. It was, however, the first time we had gone camping since we had all turned 21. And, as one expects, we had all gotten absolutely plastered. By the time the dare happened, the fire had died down to the last smoldering embers, the chill in the air seeping back into the campsite. The ruckus roars of laughter from before melting into quiet, murmured conversations. I thought that we would have turned in for the night at that point. Most of us had trouble standing on our own at that point. much less walking. Bottles littered the campsite, both empty and half full. Despite my thoughts, however, the party continued on, the conversation ebbing into a relatively tame truth or dare. I participated in a few rounds, and things were relatively okay for a little while, but I saw a spark of drunken glee in one of my friend's eyes as he leaned forward during my turn, finger pointing directly at me. "I dare you to swim to the island." The island was one of those unnamed tiny strips of land emerging from the river, barely big enough to hold a few trees and not too terribly far away from the shore. Normally, we'd swim back and forth for fun, an excellent challenge against the strong river current. This time, however, was different. For one, we had never gone swimming that far at night. We weren't complete idiots. Secondly, we had never swam that far drunk. But, being the drunken idiot I was, couldn't take a challenge like that lying down. "Fine," I declared, climbing to my feet unsteadily. "I'll be back in a few minutes." One of my friends, Jonas, stood with me. He was our designated driver, so to speak. We wanted at least one of us to be sober if there was an accident. Not that there ever was, of course. I could tell he was worried as he followed me out to the campsite and down to the riverside. He knew that the whole thing was a bad idea and tried telling me so. I wish I had listened to him. I stripped off my shoes and stepped into the water. Immediately I shivered. It's cold even during the day, but it felt like the temperature had dropped even further as nighttime fell. Still, I wouldn't let it dissuade me from my self-imposed task. I waded further into the water, Jonas following close behind me. Soon we got to the point where the water deepened enough where we couldn't touch the bottom anymore, and began to swim in earnest. The water was cold enough that I began to sober up and question the wisdom of what we were doing, but I was stubborn and I refused to back down once I had already started. The current fought with all its strength to pull us downstream, but we fought against its pull. With just the two of us, I was actually beginning to have fun. Dare almost forgotten. I turned my head to shoot Jonas a grin, and he returned it, splashing at me. A peal of laughter escaped me as I dodged the water he had flicked at me. At this point, we were nearly halfway across the river. I still remember what came next so vividly, as if it just happened. One second he was there. The next, he wasn't. All I caught was a split second of terror creeping into his expression, and then he was gone. I could feel something moving, fighting, struggling in the water beneath me, distinct from the current around me. I can never forgive myself for what I did next. Terrified, I swam towards the island, leaving Jonas behind to whatever had him. I was nearly to the shore before my mind caught up to me. My eyes flickered towards the shore, but I knew, deep down, that I couldn't abandon my friend. Not like this. I turned back around and I dove under, intending to free Jonas from whatever had him. I was too late. Far, far too late to be of any help. It was devouring him. That thing had him in its grasp. I don't know what the hell it was even after all this time. It looked human, but I know it wasn't. It couldn't be. Not when it looked like that. It was pale, almost completely white. It had claws of what looked to be silver, but whatever the hell they were razor sharp. They and its teeth cut through flesh like butter. Nothing normal could do something like that, could look like that. His head was buried in Jonas's throat, 5 scythe-like claws clutching at the body, tearing the flesh to ribbons in their grasp. His gut had already been eviscerated, 5 lines going down his abdomen, allowing various viscera to drift through the water as it ate what remained of him. I must have disturbed his meal, as the thing raised its head from the tattered remains of Jonas's throat to stare at me, the milky white eyes looking into mine. Felt like hours we were suspended there, gazes locked. In reality, it was probably less than 10 seconds, maybe even less than 5. During those crucial 5 seconds, I came to a few crucial realizations. 1, the thing wasn't some dumb creature. It could think. Those cruel eyes had intelligence behind them. 2, I was about to die. 3, I did not want to die. I could have almost hysterically laughed at the stray thought that crossed my mind. This must be how rabbits feel when they see hawks swooping towards them, claws outstretched. It was that thought that stirred me to action. I bolted, swimming as hard and fast as I could towards the island. It wasn't enough. In the split second it took me to turn around and swim for my life, I had seen it drop the corpse of my friend and lunge after me. I swam for my life, knowing that anything less than my all would mean the death of me. And yet, it wasn't enough. I had reached the shallows, enough for my toes to touch the muck, the smallest sliver of hope rising in me before it was torn away by the burning presence of agony as I felt 5 sharp claws tear through my calf, rending the flesh beneath them as if it was paper. I gritted my teeth and pulled myself forward, refusing to let that thing win. And to my surprise, I won the game of tug-of-war. The claws slid through my flesh one final time, and I was free to clamber onto the blessed safety of land. I scrambled as far away from the water as was possible on the little island, barely more than a sandbar. It was safety. I came to realize in time, but I was hardly saved. None of us had brought a boat with us. We didn't think we needed one, and with a thing out there, swimming back was hardly an option. And there lied the problem. I couldn't cross the river on my own, not unless I wanted to end up like Jonas. Likewise, I couldn't let my friends swim out to me, lest they suffer the same fate. I sat on the shore and watched the water. I could feel the thing staring back, and together, the both of us sat there and watched as the sun began to rise. As dawn rose, so did my determination. I wasn't going to die here, and I certainly wasn't going to let my friends die either. And so my course was set, a frantic race across the stretch of river. I took a deep breath, hesitating to make what was potentially my final plunge. I closed my eyes, and the last time I had seen Jonas alive flashed through my mind. I breathed out for Jonas. I say quietly as I watch the first rays of dawn begin to shine on the water. And for the others, I add silently. And then I'm running into the water. Almost instantaneously, as I began to swim against the strong current, I can feel the gaze of the thing on me. I don't dare look away from what's in front of me. I don't want to know how close it is. I didn't want to know if I was going to die. I just kept swimming. I couldn't help but to imagine the thing lurking beneath me, ready to strike every time I closed my eyes. Beyond all the hope I could muster, I managed to make it across the majority of the river. I was still wary, but I was beginning to hope that the creature had really left after all. I was still 15 feet or so away from the bank of the river when the thing struck. I was pulled into the water at once, a shriek being muffled by the water engulfing my head. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. All I could see was frothy foam as the thing began to try to eat me alive. I felt its claws sink into my gut as I felt its teeth sink into my shoulder. I couldn't breathe, being thrashed as I was. For the brief few moments my head was above water, I had few chances to take a breath. Rather, I screamed in pain, screamed for help. I'm not really sure of which one. Doesn't matter at this point, regardless. Fruitlessly, I scratched and clawed at the creature in a desperate, almost instinctual attempt to preserve my own life. It didn't work. I felt a bone shatter in my arm, by the joint. I felt a distinct feeling of being chewed on, razor-sharp teeth tearing through my flesh as if it were paper. I shrieked again in pain and horror. I'm dying, I thought, and I was beyond terrified at the idea. I escaped by sheer luck. An accident. I tried hitting the thing with my good arm and missed. I tried it again and missed, but on the upswing, my fist collided with the thing's face. Out of sheer luck, I managed to jam my finger into its eye. I can still remember how it felt as the organ ruptured around my finger. The vitreous humor gushing around my finger. I can still remember how the thing shrieked, recoiling. I remember being hazily startled at the fact that it could make noise at all. And then, a realization. I took the opportunity to flee while it still writhed in agony. I crawled onto the shore and collapsed, making sure to pull myself as far away from the water as possible. I was out of it at that point. I remember very little, but the things I do remember have stuck with me ever since. The last I ever saw of the creature was the one-eyed death glare it gave me, viscera dripping down its face from its ruined eye. and staring me down until it sank back into the water. I don't know why it left. Maybe it gave up. Maybe it decided I was too much trouble to eat. Or maybe it was the noise of my friends crashing through the undergrowth. They had heard my shriek and came running. From there, it gets a little fuzzy. From what they told me afterwards, they had fallen asleep not long after Jonas and I left. They had assumed we'd be back soon. When daylight broke and we still hadn't returned, they had gotten worried. It was my shrieking that alerted them to where I was. They said they called the cops and I was taken to the hospital for my injuries. My arm was beyond salvaging. They had to amputate to save what little was left. I wasn't too upset if I'm being honest. If it meant my arm for my life, I'd rather have my life every time. I was fortunate with my other injuries. While they left nasty scars, they healed. All in all, I made a mostly full recovery after a couple weeks in the hospital. It's been a few years now. My friends have asked me what happened. They don't believe me. They tell me that I was in shock over what happened to Jonas, and must have mistaken whatever it was. They said it was probably a bull shark or an alligator. Of course, it's hard to tell what could be the real culprit without Jonas's body. But I know what I saw, and I know it hasn't forgotten me yet. I gave up swimming. I moved into the city, but I still don't dare swim in a pool. I don't go near ponds, or lakes, or rivers. Maybe I'm being paranoid, or just maybe. It's just biding its time by the shoreline to settle the score. For my 17th birthday, my buddies, 2 17-year-olds, 3 16-year-olds, and I decided to go camping. Since I drive a lowered truck, our camping options were pretty limited. We settled for spending a night at a campsite with paved roads at Lake Pleasant in Arizona. Being the desert, the terrain was pretty much dirt and gravel. This is important for later in the story. The way the campsites are set up, there is a site every 30 feet, about 10 on each side of the road. Behind the side we were on, there was a huge ditch where there used to be water, and behind the side across from us there was a mountain. We were at the farthest spot away from the entrance, alone. Due to COVID, we were the only campers on our side of the road, with another site occupied near the entrance of the grounds. Other than those campers, we were completely alone. We got to the site, set up our tent, and walked down to the lake and went swimming. We came back about 3 hours later at 5 p.m., and we noticed my friend's truck door was not fully shut. We thought it was odd, but brushed it off as him not shutting it fully when he grabbed his clothes out of it. We made dinner, went for a hike, came back, and started to drink the surplus of booze we had brought with. We all drank way too much and decided to listen to some scary stories on YouTube and called it a night. We passed out at about 11, all of us in the tent. I woke up to a set of loud footsteps walking around the gravel and rocks by our tent. It was so loud it woke me from a booze coma. I checked my phone and saw it was 2:30 a.m. I figured it was my friend Ant, who I knew was awake at absurd hours. So I brushed it off and figured he would come back in soon enough. The person continued to walk around our tent in circles until 2:42. Then they walked up to the table we had set up and started playing with our bottles. After a few minutes of this, I heard a metallic banging sound coming from the table for about 30 seconds, and then everything went silent. I checked my phone again. 2:48. I figured my friend is going to be up for a while, so I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. The second my eyes closed, I heard it sprint out of our camp and towards the other campsite. Jolting up, one of my buddies says my name in a whisper and says, "We're all in here. That wasn't one of us." As he says this, the friend I thought was outside says, "What the fuck was that?" laying right next to me. As he finished saying this, we heard a woman scream from down the road. We woke our other friends up and ran to the other site, knives in hand. When we got to the site, there was a man hugging a woman who was crying hysterically, and what I presumed to be another couple they were with, looking around the area. I asked if they were okay, and the second man told us that they heard their car doors open chime, and the woman figured she had left it open earlier, and a breeze opened it fully, so she decided to go shut it. When she stepped out of the tent and started walking towards her car, she saw a large, dark figure next to her open door. She screamed and the figure ran across the road and down in the ditch. We told the other campers we had left our friends in our tent and needed to get back to them, but if they needed us, we would be there. We ran back to our tent, and our friends were once again passed out. The strange thing was that our tent door was zipped open, but we knew for certain that we had shut in. We woke up our friends and asked them if any of them had opened it, and they all swore they didn't. We once again brushed it off, and we all decided to go back to sleep, with our knives by our sides. We woke up at about 8:30 and went outside to make sure all of our stuff was still there. The bottles were all arranged on the table in 3 groups of 6. We know for a fact we didn't do this, as all of us could hardly walk when we decided to call it a night. Next to the far right group of bottles on the table, we saw the stakes for the tent that we put in the ground. I picked one up and dropped it on the table, and sure enough, it was the same metal sound we had heard the night before. We were too creeped out at this, and decided to pack up immediately and go home. We had everything packed and ready at around 10, and headed towards the entrance. We passed the other occupied site, and even though all of their belongings were still there, their car was gone. This is odd because once you leave, you can't come back in. They left all of their belongings there. To the 2 couples that were camping near us, I hope you're okay. And to the person who was messing with our stuff, I hope to never encounter you again.